Good morning, everybody. How are you today? Or I guess afternoon, I should say. We are so happy to welcome you to our third Lunch and Learn. I cannot believe that it's our third one already, and I can't believe it's May. And I guess maybe the weather hasn't been helping with that here in the East Coast, even though today we are delighted to have a beautiful day. We are so excited to be with you today talking about prepping for Pride Month, and we have a wonderful lineup of authors for you today. So we will get started here, and just a couple of housekeeping things to keep in mind. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box. We will try to get to all of them. And if we don't, in the wrap-up report, as many of you, if you know that if you've been following us already, we send a very intricate wrap-up report, so we try not to leave anything out. So please feel free to put any of your questions in the chat box. We'll be sending you all the titles that are mentioned, all the tiny URLs, everything. So you can just sit back, relax, and enjoy the program and not have to worry about remembering any of the details like that. One other thing I wanted to just tell you is that just be patient with us. We have a lot of moving parts behind the scenes. So in between panels, if there's a tiny bit of a delay with our PowerPoint or whatever, just be patient. We will get it running as soon as possible. Miriam and I were just reminiscing about the days where we would do book buzzes or title presentations or author presentations in the convention center or in the office, and we had wonderful IT people and tech people running the show while we just sat there with our mimosa, very patiently waiting for the program to begin. And now we have all this technical work, so bear with us. But thank you for joining us. As always, we are so excited for this program to start. So here we go. So Miriam, why don't you introduce ourselves and our first guest?
Sure, will do. Welcome to the third episode of Library Lunch and Learn. This is a bi-monthly program specifically tailored for library staff. And our aim is to introduce you to some illuminating and informative new books and support your important work in reference and readers advisory services, in collection development, as well as programming. This series features guest authors, editors, and librarians, special librarians. And this year we're covering a host of topics ranging from health and science to art and leadership. Today we're focusing our attention on Pride Month and celebrating LGBTQ stories, voices, and resources. And now it's my privilege to introduce Jason Baumann, the Susan and Douglas Dillon Associate Director for Collection Development for the New York Public Library. And he'll be here speaking about the library's LGBTQ initiative. Jason's most recent exhibition at the library is Love and Resistance, Stonewall 50. He's the editor of the Stonewall Reader, Penguin Classics, and Love and Resistance Out of the Closet into the Stonewall Era, published by W.W. Norton. He received his MLS from Queens College, his MFA in Creative Writing from the City College of New York, and his PhD in English from the Graduate Center of CUNY. Please welcome Jason.
Thank you so much, Miriam. So today I'm going to talk to you about New York Public Library's collections and this exhibition we did, Love and Resistance, and also the anthology that we produced in collaboration with it. So Love and Resistance is a show we did in 2019 to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots in June of 1969. And it really is to show off the library's collections, which are among the greatest in the United States on LGBTQ history, particularly the emergence of LGBTQ civil rights movements from the 1950s to the present. Next slide. And so two of the great treasures of the library, Kay Tobin Lahusen on right, who is really one of the first professional LGBTQ photojournalists, and Diana Davies on left. And so the show really focused on their photo archives, which are thousands and thousands of photographs illustrating and documenting the emergence of this LGBTQ civil rights movement. Next slide. So these are photos by Kay Lahusen documenting some of the first protests for LGBTQ civil rights in the United States in 1965. On the right, the protest at the Pentagon, and on the left, I think the second protest on the White House And as you can see, these are very small protests, a handful of people, but Kay knew how to frame them so it looked like thousands, I think, and also showed the importance of what was going on. Next slide. And this is a promotional poster by the Humanities Society of New York, whose archives we also have. Homosexuals Are Different. That was to draw people into this really radicalizing movement in the 1960s. Managing starts in 1950s. In the 1960s, the New York City chapter became much more radical and started doing direct protests. Next slide. This is some of the original documentation of the Stonewall riots, which there actually isn't as much photo documentation as people, I think, really desire. On the right, a photo by Diana Davies of the Stonewall in the summer after the riots, and on the left, a flyer produced by Manashine saying, "Where were you during the Christopher Street riots?" That was produced a few days afterwards. I tend to use the word riot because it's the word that was used by people at the time, and I think it was used in order to really align what was happening at Stonewall with the many other riots that happened for racial equality in the 1960s. Next slide. After Stonewall, you have emergence of organizations, Gay Liberation Front, which comes about in the months after Stonewall, and really becomes a national movement and even international, spreading to Great Britain and Latin America. Next slide. And then also Gay Activist Alliance, which grows out of Gay Liberation Front. And New York Public Library also has Gay Activist Alliance's archives, which was a central organization in the 1970s and also became a national movement, really sending people out on road trips to start chapters around the country and also at colleges around the country. Next slide. You also have the emergence of what becomes called the Third World Gay Revolution movement, which was many people of color involved in this movement. These movements who broke away to focus on issues very particular to the LGBTQ people of color. On the right, the Gay Liberation magazine of Puerto Rico, and it's part of our great LGBTQ periodicals collection. Next slide. You also have emergence of a new era of lesbian activism. This is the Lavender Menace Action, which disrupted National Organization for Women in 1970. At right is author Rita Mae Brown, who I think was the great heartbreaker of the lesbian political movements of the 1970s. Next slide. And also you have the emergence of a new era of transgender activism at that time. Here, Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson pictured, and March on Albany for LGBTQ civil rights in 1971. You have emergence of the organization Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, which was really pivotal in bringing this new era of activism to transgender movements and movements for people, gender nonconforming people. Next slide. And then leading up to the first then Gay Pride March, and actually called the Gay BN Happening in Central Park. And you can see, in contrast to those first marches on the White House and the Pentagon, how you had a handful of people. Now you have thousands of people as well. That's fine. We can go on to the next slide. So one of the things featured in the show is great treasure. That's, again, our LGBTQ periodicals collection. So these are issues of the Ladder from the 1950s to 60s. And you can see how you have emergence of people actually willing to be on the covers of these magazines and be publicly identified as lesbians in the 1960s. Next slide. You have also then, this is post-Stonewall, a whole new kind of aesthetic, a very in-your-face radical aesthetic that's also really inspired by the anti-war movement and the rest of the American counterculture. Next slide. Also in magazines like Lesbian Tide, this was a demonstration on the Museum of Natural History in New York, protesting the heterosexism and homophobia of the exhibitions, having a lesbian dinosaur that they marched onto the Natural History Museum with its Hall of Man, and there are no gay people, even I think to this day, depicted in the Museum of Natural History. Next slide. Also, we have amazing erotica collections here, Grecian Guild, which was part of the kind of physique pictorial magazines of the 1950s and 60s, and to the right, Straight to Hell, which was a reader-ridden kind of scene that emerged in the 1970s. Next. Also a course of transgender activism, so Transvestia, which was published in the 1960s, which was really also reader written and for people who identified then as cross-dressers. Many of them identify as men married to women, but leading secret lives and writing in about their experiences, also their wives. And then the Voice of Tao, the Transsexual Action Organization, which was a much more radical magazine in the 1970s that also covered UFOs and the occult. And you have this emergence of this real revolutionary movement. Next. Also emergence of publishing by LGBTQ people of color. We saw Pafuera from Puerto Rico. There's Moja Equals Gay and Black, which was first African-American LGBTQ newspaper as part of our collections. Next. Other theme that was in the show and is important in this whole time period is nightlife. And so really a lot of what Stonewall was about in New York City, gay bars could be closed down if they had LGBTQ patrons, that it was under rubric that it was disorderly conduct. And so there's great oppression and also entrapment in bars in New York City and around the country. So Mattachine, one of the things, and other LGBTQ organizations did was host alternative nightlife. This is a flyer by Mattachine for one of their dances. Next. And then post Stonewall, you have a whole emergence of a much more out nightlife. Here's a all women's dance for Gay Liberation Front, which helped fund actually Gay Liberation Front, and also Gay Activist Alliance were funded by dances. Next. GAA also then had a firehouse that was the great nightlife location with dances multiple times a week, and this photo by Diana Davies from her archive. Next. And then the emergence of gay discos and other clubs here, the Flamingo. Next. Paradise Garage, next, and a leather S&M bar, and also from the 1970s. Next, next. Last theme in the show was about intimacy and depictions of intimacy. And when you look at a lot of the images from the LGBTQ press of the 1950s and early 60s, you'll see depictions of intimacy, but often with the faces of the people turned away to protect their identities. So there's this struggle to both depict intimacy, but also protect people's privacy. And then next. And then, but then personal photographs that are also very intimate and showing, but these are private photographs that are very, very out. So this is Kay Lahusen's photo of her partner, Barbara Giddings, in the shower. So that's a real tension in the archive and something I tried to bring out in the show. Next. So it becomes a pronounced theme you can see in Kay Lahusen's archive of really trying to depict public expressions of LGBTQ intimacy. This is a couple kissing actually at the Integrity, the Episcopal LGBTQ organization, one of their first meetings in the 1970s. Next. This is by Davies. This is actually first protests for marriage equality in New York State in 1971, protest at the city clerk. Next. And this is a panel about BDSM for LGBTQ people of color that happened at Rutgers Gay Liberation Conference in 1971. Part of the theme is to make people realize the kinds of conversations that have been happening in LGBT communities for a very long time. Next. So luckily, in tandem with the show, we got to do this anthology with Penguin called the Stonewall Reader that really draws on the library's oral histories, on the great periodical collection that I gave you a little peek at the books, all of the real source material that I had to read in order to produce the show. And so it goes through these same eras of before, during, and after Stonewall, and trying to have these voices emerge from this time period. Next. So it has people like Ernestine Ekstein, who was a pivotal member of Daughters of Bilitis, and she came up in the African-American civil rights movement and really was one of the pivotal people pushing Daughters of Bilitis and Mattachine to start doing direct protests like the protests in Washington and at the Pentagon in the 60s. Next. People like John Recchi, Mexican-American gay writer, pivotal in the 1960s, section from City of Night, where he actually goes to the New York Public Library and one of the staff members tries to pick him up and cruises him. Next. And Barbara Giddings, who was a very, very important lesbian activist in the 60s and 70s, and her personal accounts of going to gay bars in the 1960s and the gay bashing that she experienced, and also cross-dressing at the time to pass. Next. Then during Stonewall, so I tried to collect all of the accounts of the Stonewall riots from the time, and then other people's memoirs. One of the most notable, Dick Leitch here, who wrote a piece, The Hairpin Drop Heard Around the World, that I think is really the source of a lot of our information and also misinformation about Stonewall. And he was at Stonewall riots and sort of dashed off this account right afterwards to put in Manishine's newsletter. Next. Then also Sylvia Rivera and Martha P. Johnson had left in a demonstration in the 1970s, and their firsthand accounts of what it was like to be at the Stonewall riots. Next. And maybe people we might not have thought of, Holly Woodlawn, who was a Andy Warhol factory superstar, but also lived in the Village at the time and talks about Latinx and trans experience of people living in the Village at the time and her experience of the Stonewall riots. Next. Arthur Evans here, and so this section of the after Stonewall, and Evans was founder of Gay Liberation Front, part of Gay Activist Alliance, and also became an occult writer in the 1970s and 80s, and so section from his book Witchcraft and the Gay Counterculture that was very influential in occult and radical sexual circles. Next. Jean Cordova, who's a Chicana lesbian activist who was instrumental on the West Coast and helped organize the first LGBTQ Pride March on the West Coast in tandem with the marches in New York. And so her account of the activism happening on the West Coast at that time. Next. And Joel Hall, who was a member of the Third World Gay Revolution movement, and his amazing piece he wrote in the 70s called Growing Up Black and Gay, that's about being incarcerated as a youth for being gay, and how he really comes to a political consciousness. So the anthology brings all of these firsthand accounts, memoirs, manifestos from this time. Thanks.
It's wonderful, Jason. Thank you so much for sharing all that. We do have a couple of questions from the audience, and one of them is, are you working on any particular acquisition or collection right now? Is there something that you're very excited about?
The two things we're really excited about, we got James Baldwin papers a few years ago, and they were recently released that the public can start accessing James Baldwin's archive. Also, Dick Leitch, right at the time when the show was up, actually Dick Leitch passed away, and we received his archive, and that should be available to the public soon. And we also have the New York City Trans Oral History Project, which is a partnership that we do with that collective, and we collect true firsthand accounts of transgender experiences and histories in New York City, and that archive is available through our website.
And that's truly wonderful. The other question that has come up is, currently the library is closed. Are the collections accessible at this time, or how are you working around the pandemic?
Yeah, so we're just starting to reopen by appointment for the research libraries this week, and in the branch libraries to open for browsing. But we've been doing book pickup, a grab and go service throughout most of the pandemic, and also we started a scanning service last summer, so that if somebody needs an article or a book chapter, they can just send us the citation, and we scan and email the required material to the patron. So we've been really inventing new ways to serve people during this time, and I'm sure everybody out there has been doing the same.
And I imagine you've been getting inquiries from all over the world.
Yes, all the time.
Yes.
I just answered one from Pakistan this morning. So yes, so we continue to serve patrons for materials locally and for reference questions globally.
The biggest thank you to you and the wonderful team at New York Public Library for making this all possible and available to people all over the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and please read the book.
Will do. I have it here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker. Mia McKenzie is the award-winning author of The Summer We Got Free and the creator of Black Girl Dangerous Media, an independent media and education project that centers queer Black women and girls. Her writing has appeared in the Kenyon Review, McSweeney's Quarterly Concern, Makeshift, which earned her a Pushcart Prize nomination, Ebony, The Guardian, and Jezebel. She has presented talks and keynotes on race, queerness, and feminism at colleges and universities around the country, including Brown University, Wellesley College, Michigan State University, University of Illinois, and many more. Mia is here today to talk with her editor, Caitlin McKenna, about her newest book, Sky Falling. Welcome, Mia and Caitlin.
Hi, thank you.
Thanks, Miriam. And thanks, Jason. That was great. You're probably going to get like emails from us asking you to email us photos and PDFs now. So, well, this is our first time talking about Mia's book, so we're happy to be. We can't see you, but we're happy to be in what we feel to be a very warm and welcoming audience. And we thought we'd kick things off by just having Mia tell us a little bit about her book, which I always think of as sort of having like Maria Semple vibes, but very Black and very queer and very Philadelphia. So yeah, tell us about your book, Mia.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. My book, Sky Falling, is about a woman, Sky, who she's kind of a loner. Well, she's really a loner, and she's approached by a kid, a 12-year-old, who says that she's the product of an egg that Sky donated when she was in her 20s. And so Sky decides to try to have a relationship with this kid, and she kind of thinks that she can do that without anything else in her life changing. And it doesn't obviously go that way. And everything in her life sort of begins to shift when she opens herself up to this new relationship, and she's really not prepared.
Yeah, it's at once like very, very sweet in this relationship between a woman nearing 40 and a 12-year-old girl, and also very funny, raunchy, sexy, complicated. So it's a book I love a lot. Your last book, which I also love, is definitely not like laugh out loud funny in the way that is. Your last book was kind of like cry out loud. Where did this idea come from? Like how did this book come to you?
Well, I think I got the idea for a woman who is an egg donor, and is approached by a kid that came from her egg a really long time ago, like 20 years ago, probably. So I don't remember exactly how it came to me because it was so long ago, but it stuck with me for a long time. And I sort of thought about media around like egg donors and how there really isn't any. There's not a lot of stories about egg donors or media around egg donors, but there's a lot about sperm donors. And kind of thought about why that might be and how we think about egg donors differently than sperm donors. And I think we view women as sort of naturally maternal or nurturing. And so we think of egg donation, I guess, less as like a comedy thing, or that women can sort of like donate eggs and then kind of forget about it and not really think about it and go that maybe it would be harder or something that a woman would continue to think about. And so I sort of became interested in writing about or thinking about a version of a woman who could do that, who could donate her eggs and kind of go along with her life and not really think about it much. And I think I was interested in who that woman might be and what she might be like, and I think, or a version of her, and I think the character Sky kind of developed from there.
Mm-hmm. I remember you also saying that you were as a reader, as a personal reader, you were trying to find books about Black people that were also really, really funny. Did that impact you wanting to write this book yourself?
Yeah, I think when this book kind of when that idea kind of came back to me and I remembered and wanted to write about it again, it was at the same time that I was looking for like a funny Black novel, and it was really hard to find a funny Black novel. And I think because most of the books that are published, the Black novels that are published, are trauma narratives. And so finding something that was not a trauma narrative was really hard. And that's kind of what inspired me to write the book at the time that I did, to have something for readers to read that was a story about Black connection and love and joy, and also for myself to have a book that was about those things.
Did the book change or surprise you at all during the writing process? Like, how long have you been writing it, and what was the process of writing it like?
Yeah, I wrote it for a long time, and I started it a few years ago, and and then that time I had kids, and the pandemic happened, so it was a long process. And I don't know, I think writing always kind of surprises you. I mean, I think that the story definitely changed. I think over time I think my wanting it to be something that was rooted very much in family and love and connection and good things kind of shifted a little bit over time, and it became funnier and it became more of that, I think. But yeah, the process was sorry, I have a baby in the background, and she's watching Sesame Street, but I'm right here, baby. That's Rio. So yeah, it was a lot like this, the process. A lot of the time was a lot like this. A toddler calling for me in the background. Yeah, but
your body is doing like an amazing job blocking her. I guess like, just like my experience of your process, you didn't show the stress at all. So
thank you. There she is there, right behind that pillow, or underneath it. So, but yeah, the process was great, and the working with you was really good and positive, and all over it was a chaotic but a good experience for sure.
Now that we're sort of a month out from the book actually being published, what are you hoping that readers are going to take away from it, or who are you hoping is going to come to it?
Well, I hope everyone comes to it. I tried to write a really funny book. So I hope mostly that people laugh and think it's hilarious. And then too, like I said, I wrote it so that there would be more narratives about Black people and Black experiences that were more joyful. And so I hope that particularly Black readers and Black queer readers Black queer readers especially I don't think we have a lot of stories like that out there. So we'll come to it and find something that maybe they've been looking for the way that I was looking for it. And to kind of show a more a fuller kind of experience of a Black queer woman's life, and Black family and Black love and all of those things. So people who are interested in those kinds of stories.
Thanks, Mia.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that Mia has a secret identity when she goes to parties, when she doesn't want to talk about her book, which is actually that she tells people she's a librarian.
I do.
So she wants to talk about books, but not her book.
That's right. I do tell people. But you know what? I got one time I just moved to a new city. I think it was Oakland, and I did that. I was at a party and someone asked me what I did, and I said I was a librarian. And then they said, "Oh, which library?" But I had just moved there and had no idea what the libraries were. So I was like, "Oh, sorry, you never know. I'm not a librarian, I'm a writer." And then I had to talk about what I was writing. So it backfired, but just that one time. The rest of the times it always works.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If there's any questions, we're here. If not, we hope you read Mia's book.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you so much, Mia and Caitlin. I guess I do have a question, since you have been posing as a librarian. What kinds of books have you been recommending?
Oh, well, I'm always recommending, lately I'm always recommending anything I've read that was funny, especially in kind of pandemic times, especially. I recently read, and I actually recommended this to Caitlin. I read Kevin Wilson's book, Nothing to See Here, and I was so into it that I just told everyone, including Caitlin, to read it. I recently read the book, The Good Lord Bird, which is like strange because it is a slave narrative, but it's not, but it's like so different than anything that like it's really funny and interesting. So that's a book that I've been recommending to people. So stuff that's funny, that's not too heavy, especially in pandemic times, is probably mostly what I've been telling people recently.
That's wonderful. Thank you again, Mia and Caitlin. Sky Falling is being published by Random House, and it will be out on June 22nd. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I love that you were used a librarian as your alias. We'll have to try that one day. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a great day. All right, so just getting to our next panel here. Let's see, give me 1 second to get situated. Okay, and sorry, it's just like clunky. All right, so on to our next panel. We are very excited to have Lauren Hough today talking about Leaving Isn't the Hardest Thing, a collection of essays. I sort of feel like we could stop what the program is supposed to be and just talk about your bio, Lauren. So I'm just gonna Lauren Hough was born in Germany and raised in 7 countries and West Texas. I love that. She's been an airman in the U.S. Air Force, a green aproned barista, a bartender, a livery driver, and for a time, a cable guy. Her work has appeared in Granta, The Wrath-Bearing Tree, The Guardian, and HuffPost, and she lives in Austin. I think that I have a lot of questions about just all that. And she's going to be in conversation with Tim O'Connell, a senior editor from Knopf. So thank you both very much for being here today, and we can't wait to hear about your book.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first I want to thank Jason for that incredible presentation, and Kelly and Miriam for introducing us and having us, and all the library marketing team at PRH and all the librarians who are listening. We can only see each other and our photos, so I'm trying really hard not to stare at the photo of myself as we talk here, Lauren. But I love your headshot. You know this book. I know you poured your heart out into this book, and you created something really, really beautiful and special, and obviously that touched a lot of people. You spent 2 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, and I think when you and I were early on talking about this, you had mentioned how long and how much you wanted to be a writer, and what a lot of this meant. So I think just to give people some context here, because I want to talk about libraries mostly, and I think your bio gives us a good entryway into that, because you've had so many different lives, and the one thing that can stay consistent in moving around is books and libraries. But what was the first? Let's start with the really the stupidest question that writers get asked. When did you really start thinking about that you really wanted to start writing essays in particular?
Essays in particular? Did you set up this question? Because you knew it was you who did that. Yeah, it was during a phone call. The cable guy essay worked for some reason. I kind of wrote it on the fly, and I thought it was a throwaway, so I just put everything I thought and was mad at into it, and it worked. It caught on. Apparently, if you show some emotion, that works. Who knew? And yeah, we talked on the phone. We sent you a proposal for a memoir, and you were like, okay, let's not do that though. It sounded fun. It was not fun. But it sounded, yeah, I had a few more things to say.
Well, but I thought that because I had read your essay, the Cable Guy essay, which, probably half the world read as well, because it tore through the internet so much that it got to me on my honeymoon, and I wrote you from there. But you also had written what would become Solitaire, the first essay in the book, which I think, is an interesting lens with which to look at pride as well. But that was on, there was a website that it was published in 2 parts, and it was on a military website that it was published, yes? So it wasn't exactly the most viral piece, but I remember reading it there and thinking like, oh my gosh. And so you must have been writing essays before you and I talked about it too.
Yeah, I don't even know that I realized they were essays. Both of those were sort of accidental. The Cable Guy essay was my being bored and stoned and frustrated in between classes and procrastinating, and I wrote a Twitter thread about, hey, you guys want to hear some dumb cable guy stories? And a friend of mine had worked at HuffPost asked me if I could write an essay on it, and I had to take my dog to the vet, so yeah, that was easy money. Um, and the raspberry tree piece, Solitaire, this is the same kind of thing. A friend of mine, Andrea Williams, was starting this literary website for veterans and asked if I had anything I might want to send. And sure, I'd written that in Berlin, and it wasn't, I thought it, I didn't think it was anything. I, yeah, I came into this all the wrong way and pretty accidentally.
Isn't that maybe the best way to come to things sometimes, though? Because clearly it's worked out. Getting back to libraries for a second, I'm gonna borrow something from someone who's a better interviewer than I am, but you gave an answer to Terry Gross. And this, for some context for those who are watching, this is when Lauren, we can talk a little bit about the book, people may already know about it, but one of the reasons you were moving around so much is because you grew up in the Children of God, a cult that had different outposts throughout the world. And when you come back to, the country of West Texas, to Amarillo, you say that your grandmother, the first thing she did was get you library cards. So was that the first time that you were sort of exposed to libraries and going to libraries?
It wasn't the first. It was when I was we spent a few years out of the cult. My parents left for a while, and yeah, I think my only friend for a long time was, or the only person I thought I was a friend was a school librarian. You were only allowed to check out one book at a time, but she'd let me check out as many as I wanted, and I treasured them and kept them very carefully and returned them all. And she gave me White Fang to read when I was like only 9 and should not have been reading White Fang, but I was obsessed with dogs. So after I checked out all of the dog books, she handed me that. And then, yeah, going back to Amarillo, I didn't know what to read. I wasn't going to a school that, handed you books and told you these are the things you should be reading. I had no idea where to begin. So once I'd gone through all the Agatha Christie's, there was a lady there I could ask, and I don't, yeah, God, it sounds like this really sad life, but I loved being at the library. Like librarians were the people I wanted to talk to and hang out with, and I was just this dumb kid who hung out at the desk way too often looking for approval, but yeah.
Did your grandma have like a home library?
She did. She had all of this row of Encyclopedia Britannicas, all of them, those leather-bound beautiful things. And then she was kind of a hoarder. Starts with National Geographic magazines because they're very stackable, and then carries on to books. So yeah, every unused corner of her house had a stack of books, and the books she sent me when we were in the cult were just, it was very random. It was everything from like Louis L'Amour novels to Lolita. Not things I probably should have been reading at the time, but I I don't think the subject mattered to me all that much at the time. I just wanted to read anything because if I started reading, I could not think.
Mm-hmm. Were there any LGBTQ writers that you stumbled upon in the library, or maybe you wish maybe you stumbled upon more in the library at any given time that were particularly influential to you?
Yeah, I did, and I don't know that it was entirely accidental. A librarian recommended oranges are not the only fruit to me one time. Fried green tomatoes. I wasn't allowed to watch the movie because that was definitely homosexual, but if I read the book on the roof, my stepdad wasn't going to climb up there and find out what I was reading. So yeah, I knew that one should be hidden, and I did hide it. Yeah, I devoured them and never thought about them again because that might make me gay if I enjoyed it too much. But
Right.
yes, librarians are subversive. They're great. They recognize us.
Was there a library in the military?
Yeah, weirdly there was. There's a base library. I didn't really notice for years until I was being court-martialed and couldn't associate with anyone, couldn't really talk to anyone, and once you're definitely the person under investigation and being court-martialed, nobody's going to hang out with you. Pariah on base. But yeah, there was a base library, and that's where I discovered Kurt Vonnegut and just read through all of those.
Oh, that's amazing.
I do books the same way I binge watch TV shows. I find one author and then just read everything. Get really mad that they don't have anything else and find another. Yeah, that was the year of Kurt Vonnegut.
Oh, I love that. That's the place that you guys found each other, because it's just so perfect. I'm not sure how much more time we have, but I there's one really impactful library in the book that I don't think most people would think of as a library, and I want to highlight it because for people out there who haven't read the book, it's really important, and I think Lauren is talking about things that everyone needs to hear, but she's doing so in a way that makes people laugh, but also there are some harder moments, and it's when you're in the shoe, and there's a wheeled library, right? In a way, there's a cart of books for when you're in solitary that comes by, and it's just, to me, always been one of the most poignant things you've ever written. And I forget, what was the book that was on the cart that you ended up getting? You describe it in the essay.
I got let's preface, I didn't get to choose. I didn't have my glasses on. I come in with contacts. I feel like we need to be really clear here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just choose, and I was kind of hoping for, I'd finally read The Stand or Infinite Jest or something really thick that I would just never have time to read otherwise. I got David Baldacci's The Winner and Jodi Picoult's My Sister's Keeper. I'd already read The Winner because my mom had the same David Baldacci, John Grisham phase that everyone's mom had in the 90s. So, yeah, I went back later on to try to give them books. Because, I had a stack of books I'd already read, and they won't take them. I think you have to buy them from a certain store and send them to the jail in case you bake a file into it.
Yeah, and they have to be paperbacks. So the good thing is that we can send leaving isn't the hardest thing into jail libraries, and we should probably talk about that maybe, because there's a lot of programs for it. And I remember when I was working with Nico Walker and he was in jail, the library saved him, and that's something I think that often gets kind of overlooked in all of this. I want to, it's intense, but I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me. And, Kelly, thank you for popping up, because Lauren and I will unfortunately sit here and talk too long.
Yeah, and I was popping in to say that you encouraged people to have Vonnegut weekends, which is great. And also be in touch with us, and we can get you a list of prison libraries. I wanted to pop in and make sure I said that before you guys hung up. So that's wonderful.
Yeah.
We could help you with that.
That would be wonderful. That would be great. I don't know, any closing thoughts, Lauren, about Pride Month and about libraries or libraries in general?
I don't know. It's hard to talk about libraries as a little queer kid who still is just madly in love with libraries. That's home base. It's the spot you're safe. I don't know what else to say about him.
I think that's beautiful.
We love
Honestly,
hearing that librarian befriended you, and I always love when people talk about Encyclopedia Britannicas because I miss them. I really do.
I do too.
So, thank you both so much for being with us today. That was really great. And honestly, Lauren, I feel like I could have asked you 1,000 questions about your bio. So we wish you the very best with this book.
I wrote a whole book about it. So.
Yeah, I can't wait to jump in.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's going to be a lot in there that everyone is going to be happy to read and learn more about you. And yeah, we will be in touch with you about prison libraries. And we really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Bye, guys. Bye,
Have
everyone.
a good
Thank you.
day. All right, let me just get this back end stuff and let's see. We will move on to our next panel. Let's see. And all right, let's see. Sorry. Okay. All right, moving on to our next panel. We're so happy to thank you guys for waiting patiently in the wings. We are so excited to talk to Nawaaz Ahmed and Dan Smetanka. Did I get it? All right. And the book is Radiant Fugitives. And let me just read you a little bit about Nawaaz before we start. He was born in Tamil Nadu, India. Before turning to writing, he was a computer scientist, researching search algorithms for Yahoo, which makes my brain hurt right away. He holds an MFA from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and is the winner of several Hopwood Awards. He is also the recipient of many residencies and also a Kundiman and Lambda Literary Fellow. And he currently lives in Brooklyn. And we're so excited today that he's going to be in conversation with Dan, his executive editor from Counterpoint Press. And we are so happy you're here. Thank you very much. And here you go. Talk about your book, and I'll see you in a few minutes.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Miriam, for organizing this. Nawaaz and I are so excited to be here with you today to talk about his incredible debut novel, Radiant Fugitives. As an editor, and I think for all of us as readers, we long for that moment of discovery when you encounter a new writer whose work just has an immediate and significant impact upon us. And that is how I felt when I first read Nawaaz's book. So my first question for you, Nawaaz, your main character of Seema was exiled from her family in India when she came out as a lesbian. And she eventually makes her way to the much more gay-friendly town of San Francisco. But during that time, she experiences many historical events. Protests for the Iraq War, the fight for marriage equality, the election of Barack Obama, and her own struggles with accepting herself. And that is why I feel your book is so important, especially for libraries and for Pride reading lists and programs, because Seema is this incredible character, but she's also living through history in a very personal way. So can you talk a little bit about how you created this novel that is a family story, but also a political story?
Thank you, Dan, and thank you all for having me here. First of all, I have to say that Jason Bowman's presentation of those wonderful pictures that photos and things he shared are possibly the reason why Radiant Fugitives is the way it is, because that history that we see there is something that I did not have growing up. I grew up in India, and we didn't even talk about sex, so there was really no talk about homosexuality, and I didn't know anybody around me who was gay growing up, and so I felt I had to leave the country in order to find myself, and that's unlike Seema, of course. My main character in the book, as you know, is forced to leave because her father exiles her when she comes out as lesbian. I, on the other hand, chose to exile myself to the US, and I do end up in San Francisco. as well. I spent there 9 years while I was a computer scientist working at Yahoo, as Kelly introduced me. So I think that particular wanting to have that kind of a history and for people to be able to see the political story along with the family story so that they could not separate the two. So far, I think in a lot of books about India, you have a lot of just the domestic story and you leave out all this other history that comes along with us as immigrants who come here and how we see this country, and especially gay immigrants who've come here searching for something. The title, The Radiant Fugitives, is really about us as people fleeing certain darknesses in our past and trying to move towards light. And coming out as a gay person in the US, it was these public events that really spoke to how I created myself. I mean, the parades, the marriage equality fight. I was there in San Francisco during 2000 to 2008, when we had 2000, we had the Prop 22 ban gay marriage. In 2004, we had Gavin Newsom preside over the first gay marriages in the country. And by 2008, we had a constitutional ban that was added to the Constitution of California. So that, in a way, created who I am right now. And I felt like you could not tell a family story without the political story. That as people, I am defined by the politics around me. I mean, we say the personal is political, but political becomes personal for so many of us. So yeah, so I could not separate out the two stories. I had to write one that included both of them.
I think that's such an important point, Nawaaz, the idea of exiling oneself, which is so common for many gay people, to have to find a sense of freedom, usually far away from home. And Seema certainly does that in the journey of the book. But there's also a lot of contrasts in that she hasn't totally accepted herself. She still struggles, even in such a political landscape, to do so. And I think, one of my favorite scenes are the moments in California when Obama is elected, but then so is a marriage ban. So there always is that kind of push and pull. Do you think that kind of tension has always been with us and always will be with us?
It has definitely been with me, and I hope that the next generation may have less of that. But I think growing up, I think even now, I think there's a huge discussion in the gay communities about marriage. Like, is that a good thing? Is this just an adoption of the heterosexual paradigm? So there is that push and pull, this tension, and I think Seema feels that. I mean, Seema feels all these very complex things about the marriage equality fight. For one, she believes that the marriages happen in during the Iraq wars, when the first gay marriages started happening in 2004, and she was like, gay marriages, she thinks that that's like buying into this whole American dream, rather than while the country is going around has invaded another country, and she feels like, how can I be so happy about what is happening here while there is this other aspect of America that is happening too. So I think she feels a whole lot, both as an immigrant, as a queer person, as a brown person, and that tension is there, and I feel that too. And I think a lot of I don't know, I can't speak for every queer person, but I feel that that kind of tension is there.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. So Seema is living in San Francisco in her kind of pleasant exile. She's working for the state attorney general, Kamala Harris, and she's awaiting the birth of her first child. But like every exile, sometimes the past comes calling. So her mother travels from India to be with her in the week before the baby is due, as does her sister, who is currently living in Texas. And just during the course of this week, it's only 7 days, but I feel like you've managed to give us the whole history of this family in this very short time. So can you talk about how you were able to kind of write that and your intentions behind that?
Yeah. One thing I think that makes sense to mention is that Seema is pregnant at the beginning of that. And turns out that even though I wanted to write a political novel as well, the first thing that came to me was a family story. What I saw when actually one day when I woke up, I had this very vivid picture of three women, two sisters sipping tea. One of them is pregnant, and the mother is sleeping in the other room, is actually pretending to sleep because she knows that there's some tension between the two sisters. And I think you recognize that scene, Dan. It's there in the book, and that's the thing that led to the whole novel. And I knew that starting this, that's all I actually knew about these characters. One is pregnant, the other is very religious, and the mother is trying to bring them together. And the whole process of writing the novel became a process of discovering who these characters were. And I think framing the novel in those 7 days, like I knew that since the sister was pregnant, she had like 7 days, and she was going to deliver a baby in 7 days. And so it gave me a structure, like I could, through that interactions in that 7 days, be able to figure out who these characters were. And so writing those 7 days helped me discover the characters. And then the parts came out from those interactions, like what really happened in these 7 days. Why is Seema, who's a lesbian, pregnant, and who's the father of the baby? Why is was her sister always this religious? Why is the mother trying to bring them together? So those questions, I think, followed from trying to write these 7 days, and that produced the structure of the book.
Right. Interesting. The novel has an ending, a coda, that is one of the best I've ever read. And it contains significant story twists, so we won't talk about that. No spoilers. Everyone will have to kind of read that to discover it for themselves. But we have to mention that the entire novel is narrated by Seema's child at the moment of his birth, which is a really bold choice for a writer to make. Can you talk about why you made that choice?
Yeah, the book actually, I wrote that scene, as I said, and the book did not flow for another couple of years until I discovered something about who was narrating. When I wrote that scene, I had an opening line for that scene, and that now is actually in this wonderful coda that you've mentioned. And I was trying to discover whose voice that was. It didn't belong to these three women. And there was this, and also it was an omniscient voice, and he was making pronouncements about, I did not want a godlike omniscience, because I felt like I was still discovering these characters and I could not start making pronouncements about them. And I think I was running one day by the lake while doing my MFA, that it suddenly struck me that it was the baby. The baby was going to tell the story, because he then gets to discover the characters just like I was going to be discovering the characters. The baby is just at the moment of birth, he doesn't know the world, and he is going to learn about the world, the queer history, what's happening in the world and all the rest, just like I would be at the same time. And so I think it became this kind of, the baby is me and I am the baby, in the sense of, as the writer, trying to understand these people and trying to understand why they came to this particular place. And so I think it was a very, very fortunate discovery, because I think the book would have been very different without that.
Right, right. Well, it took you about 10 years to write this book, correct? So what was that journey like?
I had to learn how to write because I was a computer scientist, and I had all my life was in the sciences. So a lot of initial, for example, in the first years, I would just go to libraries to write. I would like get away from home. I spent a lot of the first 2 years of my writing in libraries, where just go there, spend like a few hours every day in order to write. And the process of writing was this process of discovery. First, I had to learn how to write, and was also learn who these characters were, learn the history of the queer movements, of the Obama campaign. So there was a lot of learning to do. And I think it wasn't until like 4, 5, or 6 years since I began writing the novel, I actually began to see, oh, this is how it's supposed to be. And I think, yeah, until even it got to you, I think I was still like, there's still something missing, and there's still something there that I need to figure out. And so the editorial process with you was wonderful, because then I think some of the things finally fell into place. And it was a long process, but I'm glad finally to be here.
I know we learn this time and time again. It takes what it takes. But I'm so glad you embarked on that process, Nawaaz, because it is just such a beautiful tour de force debut book, and something that I think everyone is really going to enjoy and be moved by for the queer history, but also, of course, for the characters. I think we're about out of time, so thank you for being here and for talking with me today.
Yes, thank you so much, Dan and Nawaaz. Congratulations on the publication of the book. Radiant Fugitives will be published by Counterpoint, and it will be releasing in August. We're looking forward to reading it. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
It's now our pleasure to introduce Brandon Taylor, the author of the acclaimed novel Real Life, which has been shortlisted for the Booker Prize, longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize, and been named a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice. The senior editor of Electric Literature's Recommended Reading and a staff writer at LitHub, he holds graduate degrees from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the University of Iowa, where he was an Iowa Arts Fellow at the Iowa Writers Workshop in Fiction. Please welcome Brandon in conversation with his editor, Cal Morgan.
Hi, Brandon.
Hi, Cal.
It's so great to see you. It's so great to see you in this setting. And I just can't say how excited I am to be within earshot and have us within earshot of a big gang of librarians who are my favorite people on earth, I think.
Oh yeah, librarians, the best. I mean, true stewards of the future, I feel.
Right, exactly. I wanted to just start by saying a word about kind of the two books that have been on our plate together, you and me, for the past several years, which are Real Life and Filthy Animals. I think many of the folks who are on this call were aware of Real Life when it landed last year. There was enormous support for Real Life within the library community. And it was a book that obviously started a lot of conversations about life within an academic setting, life for queer people, African-American people, people working within a setting that was not always welcoming, that was often forbidding and difficult to navigate. And I think there's not been a writer who has done a more concerted and impressive job of capturing that experience than Brandon did in this book. And but I had an interesting sort of experience coming to you as a writer, because I had been reading mostly your nonfiction online, and then had both Real Life and Filthy Animals land on my lap because of our mutual friend, your agent Meredith, at the same time. Those books were submitted together. And one of the things that I felt most profoundly when I read both books, and really took great heart and confidence from in the reading experience, was that I felt that when I started by reading Real Life, and because, as publishers, we start with the novel because we are crass commercialists at the end of the day. And I was astonished by the acuity of that book, by the heart, by the propulsiveness, by the level of detail that you grant to these folks' lives. And then I read Filthy Animals, and for me, Filthy Animals was a second revelation of equal power, because Real Life demonstrated depth, and Filthy Animals took all of that depth and added to it breadth, and added to it your ability to serve not just one story with enormous intimacy, but in the sense of this new book, Filthy Animals, which is a story collection, but with a suite of stories at its core that the book kind of approaches and moves away from and moves back again to, pulls in the lives of a whole gaggle of people in this community. And you demonstrate in that book that there are ways of coming at people's lives and kinds of people to write about that just demonstrated your appetite for capturing the nuance of a broad walk of life. And so what I wanted to sort of draw you out a little bit about first is that those are two books you generated almost simultaneously. And I wonder if you could kind of walk listeners a little bit through the process of how you as a writer can generate two works like that within a short, period of time, almost with your left hand and with your right hand. How do they coexist in your mind? Do you toggle back and forth between one or the other? And how do you know what becomes a short story and what can grow into being a novel?
Oh, well, that's big if true, as the kids say. I mean, so the stories that comprise Filthy Animals, I wrote those before I wrote Real Life by like a hair, like 2 months or something.
Yeah.
And part of my impulse in wanting to write Filthy Animals was that I wanted to write a group of stories that would satisfy me as a reader. And as a reader, whenever I read short stories, I'm like I'm a very clingy reader, and I'm like, but I'm not done with this character. I want to know more about them. I want to know about all the people and their lives. And so the stories, and this is true of all of my short stories, they always grow out of a set of questions and preoccupations. Like, I don't think of just like one character. I have this really terrible habit of thinking in suites of characters and in constellations of stories. And so I never feel like I'm working on one story. I always feel like I'm working on a group of stories or a batch of stories. I'm always thinking in like manuscript form. And so in that sense, I feel like there really is no difference in my brain as to like what becomes a novel or what becomes a book of stories, because I'm always thinking in sort of the large structural connections. And as a reader, I love a callback. I love characters appearing in multiple stories. I love following characters through different phases and through different events in their lives. And so it just made sense to write these kind of like three-dimensional stories in a sense. And I did feel some trepidation about it, because at the time, a lot of people were telling me, oh, no, you should write books of stories that are like linked thematically, but not narratively and stuff like that. And then I thought, well, like Elizabeth Strout writes collections of stories where characters are all interrelated. And like, I love Elizabeth Strout's books. And so like, maybe I don't have to try to make it be a novel or a book of stories. Maybe I can just write what interests me, which is these constellations of characters ultimately. And so I think even in terms of real life, like there's a way of looking at that novel as like just 10 short stories about one guy doing light stuff.
Right.
And so I think that's really what I think in. I think in relationships and constellations of events and characters.
I mean, this makes so much sense because I know that during the time when we were working on both books, not too often, but there would occasionally be a question that would come up. I think especially when we were sort of working on the earliest versions that you and I sort of went back and forth about together, where a story would come out or a story would, you know, get added. But at the same time, I was aware that you were generating other stories and other suites of stories that you were either because you would publish them or because they were just things that you sort of would talk about. And I was aware, and it's almost as though it began to become clear to me that you had a bunch of different lives that you were living, in the same way that when, you know, we go off to college, we suddenly have a suite of friends, but then when we come home, we have like the suite of friends from school that we haven't seen in a long time. And it suddenly it makes a lot of sense to me to think about them as groups of people that you're coming back to see when you re-enter the work on a certain book.
Yeah, I mean it's funny, and you know there are the books that we were working on, you know, Real Life and Filthy Animals, and then there was, you know, I can't work on just one thing at a time. I'm horribly distractible. And so I was working on these other batches of stories, and I'd like work on them and send them to my agent and be like, when can we show Cal these stories? Like when can we introduce Cal to these other worlds that I'm building? And Meredith would be like, well, we'll wait until, you know, we're a little further along, like not wanting to sort of, because part of what happens is if you put too many things on the same plate, they tend to bleed together, and then each one isn't served to the best, and you know, the best of its qualities. And so, you know, I would work in secret and sort of keep them from you, and then when it was time to reveal them in all their fullness, one of my agent's favorite phrases is "in the fullness of time." So when the fullness of time had arrived, I would reveal these other sort of collections of people to you. And you know, it's difficult for me because I like to work and then show people the thing immediately. I want feedback immediately. And so it was difficult to give the later batches of story the time they needed to fully gestate before, you know, letting too many cooks into the kitchen.
But it was so much fun to once we felt like we had the basic collection together, to really sort of read it purposefully as a collection, think about issues of sequence, think about whether, and there wasn't a lot that we did in terms of shifting sequence or anything like that. But I think by the time we had finished working on the book, I know I certainly understood its kind of overall momentum and dynamic so well, and sort of understood where that power had been coming from, that had been there from the beginning, but was radically enhanced because, as you've been very open about in interviews about the book, you come back and radically revise along the way, even when we're deep into the process.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I sent you some notes like 3 days ago. I mean, you know, I mean, part of it is I wrote those stories so long ago, the first versions of those stories back before I even had fully embarked on like a full-time life as a writer, back when I was still working in a research lab. And so as publishing takes a long time, even after we'd sold the book to you, I was just like a different person and a different writer. I had read more, I had written more, I knew more about what I wanted to do as an artist and stuff like that. And so it would have felt strange to send the book out into the world without having sort of brought it up to a level that I felt represented, you know, like that represented like what I could do as a writer, but at the same time not disturbing the magic that had existed in the stories all along. And you know, there's a version of the book that I could have just like completely blown it apart and rewritten it in like what I consider my now style. But the thing is, like, that style is going to change again, and I'm going to be unhappy with it until I die. And so I thought, I have to make it good enough that I can live with, and also just let it be. Like learning to let things go is part of the writer's life, and I'm still learning.
Right. One of the reasons I was really excited about the idea of doing this event and talking about the book in the context of libraries is that there are really memorable scenes set in libraries in Filthy Animals and in real life, particularly in Filthy Animals. There's a very kind of sexually charged scene that happens when one of the characters comes across his girlfriend sitting there kind of in the choreography library, which I'd never even given thought to the idea that there's such a thing as a choreography library. But it also sort of brought up to me that because Filthy Animals and Real Life are both set in university towns in relatively academic contexts, that there was a way in which all of the settings, whether they're libraries or classrooms or, you know, the college cafe or what have you, are really interesting charged spaces. And I think in some cases very usefully queer or queer friendly spaces, in some cases just spaces that allow for a degree of sort of unexpected privacy or what have you. And I wanted to see if you had anything to say about the nature of libraries and the nature of spaces in particular within contexts like that and what they do for you as a writer.
Yeah. Well, part of that is, in some ways, like the stories that take place in libraries or in academia are kind of my little love letter to the Memorial Library on the campus of UW-Madison, which is just like this gorgeous, incredible library. And it was like going there felt like going to Hogwarts in some way. Like it was an incredible space. And I read Mavis Gallant in that library for the first time, and she's an incredibly important writer to me. And I wrote some of my first stories in there. And so it felt, I don't know, like whenever I go into that library, I feel like anything is possible. And I don't know. And so like the book is, whenever I'm thinking about an academic setting in some way, like the feeling I want to give to it, that feeling of charge and magic and tension, it all comes from like those big, huge reading rooms in the UW-Madison library. And yeah, some of my favorite memories of grad school are in that library.
Oh yeah, I mean, I remember in high school going to my high school library where there was a big section of bound Life magazines from the 1940s and 50s, and it just felt like an opportunity to live in a very primary source world in depth. It wasn't like you're getting one Xerox because you're in a class. It was like years and years of them, and you could do it privately. You could do it and sit there on your own, and nobody was around. You could be in your own world. So I very much relate to that.
Oh, love a library.
Love a
Their
library.
havens. Their havens. Yeah.
This is a book about characters. It's an interesting shift that is happening between Real Life and Filthy Animals, where Real Life got a lot of attention for being set in the world of the sciences and in a biochem grad school program. Filthy Animals is less specifically about a certain discipline in this way, but it is about the arts. It's probably most pointedly about characters who are in many cases in the world of dance, but it broadly touches on other people who are within the arts and is more of a portrait of a community of people who are within the art space. And I can sort of issue enough of a spoiler alert to say that you have further works forthcoming after Filthy Animals that will continue to explore that space. So I just wanted to see if you would talk a little bit about what fascinates you about writing about people who are in the arts. What are the kind of opportunities for exploring life in the context of characters who are themselves exploring life in a way and themselves exploring expression in the same way that you are? Is it about your sort of opportunity to express things about your own life and the lives of your friends? Is there something that's narratively interesting about it? I'm curious what that is like for you as a writer.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just I'm a very process-oriented person. Maybe it just comes from that, being a process geek, and art being an important part of many of our lives and wanting to explore that in its sort of, ramifications and impulses. So it's probably just because I love watching documentaries about artists more than anything else.
There are so many good ones.
In libraries, yes.
Right. I don't know if we have a lot more time. I don't know if we have any other questions from the field. I know it's 2:20, so I thought I'd check in.
Yeah, we should probably wrap it up, but that was a good, I think ending on a SKYE library anecdote was probably the perfect way to end this, session.
Good.
And Brendan, I love how you said you were a clingy reader. I love that. I'm going to use that.
Oh yeah, I have real sort of, I don't want to let them go. Like I think we all have characters like that who we want to know everything about their lives, even at the end of the book.
We do. And sometimes we get like very personally upset with the author for not telling us everything. One author told us once that she was getting married outside at the beach somewhere. She's walking down the aisle and one of her fans was yelling, "What about Janet asking her questions about the end of her book while she was getting married?"
I love that.
I get it. I don't blame the fan.
I mean, what else are you going to get a chance to ask? I mean, it's great. I love it.
But I think clingy reader, I'm definitely gonna use that because I'm definitely the same way. So
I'm a clingy editor. I won't let go of a manuscript until you claw it out of my hand. So I can relate.
That's funny. Well, thank you both so much. It was really, really nice listening to you talk about your book and both of them. And we appreciate you being here today so much. And if there's any questions that come into the chat or whatever, we will let you know.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brandon.
Very much. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We just want to share with you one more quick little thing before we leave today. And that is, hold on. That is that we have a selection of further reading for Pride Month. Obviously, this is not all inclusive, but there's a tiny URL on the bottom of the screen. Like I said earlier, we will be sending this out in the wrap-up report, but we do have some other titles for you as well. And we could have had triple this many, but we thought we'd pick out some fun ones that are coming out in the upcoming months or it just came out. And we just really appreciate all of your time and your support. And our next Lunch and Learn is going to be very exciting in the summer, July 8th. It's an art and photography episode, and you can register in the tiny URL at the bottom of the screen, or again, we'll be sending it out. But have a wonderful day, everybody, and thank you so much for being here today. Thank you, Miriam, for all of your hard work on this program as well.
Thank you, colleagues. It's great to see you all.
It is. Take care and enjoy the beginning of the summer. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you. Bye.